For this video, we'll be doing lesson 6-5, where we look at turning fractions, decimals, and percents into each other. First definition is a percent. A percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. Okay, so a percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. So, writing a percent as a fraction. Since it's a ratio that compares a number to 100, you want to say that it's always over 100. That's just to start, right? You can always simplify, but when you first set it up, you're always going to put your percent over 100. So, for example, it says 30%. We're going to write it as a fraction, so we're going to write it with a denominator of 100. So we're just going to say 30 over 100. Whoops. Okay, and that's our percent as a fraction, but we can simplify that. So if we divide the top and the bottom by 10, we get 3 over 10. So 30% written as a fraction is 3 over 10. 175%, even though it's more than 100, we always still put it over 100. So denominator of 100, so we're going to say 175 over 100. Then we're going to simplify that. If we divide the top and the bottom by 25, we're going to get 7 over 4. We can write that as a mixed number. 4 goes into 7 one time with 3 left over, so it's 1 3/4. So again, for writing a percent as a fraction, you always just put the given percent over 100 and then simplify. Given percent over 100, simplify. If you need to write it as a mixed number, do so. Okay, so that's going from a percent to a fraction. When you're writing a percent as a decimal, okay, when you're writing a percent as a decimal, over here we're going to say percent to decimal. You're going to divide by 100. To write a percent as a decimal, you're going to divide by 100. So you can write it like they do, where you put it over 100, and then you do the math where you take the top divided by the bottom, and you end up with 0.073. Or you can write it as 7.3 divided by 100. Oops. Let's put that a little lower. 7.3 divided by 100 equals. So you can write a fraction and then the answer, or I'll be writing it this way, where you just write the percent, divide by 100, and you get your answer. Okay, so writing a percent as a decimal, percent to a decimal, all you're doing is dividing by 100. When you're going from a decimal to a percent, you're going to times by 100. Okay, you're going to times by 100. They have a lot of really complicated steps that we're not going to do. So if we're trying to write 0.412 as a decimal, we're going to say 0.412 times 100 equals 41.2%. Okay, because we're writing a decimal as a percent. And we're going to do it this way. It's much more straightforward. One tricky thing that you really need to pay attention to is that you have percent symbols in your answers when they are percents. So you need to make sure that you're paying attention to what you're turning it into and that you have a percent symbol when needed. If you have percent symbols when not needed, or if you're missing a percent symbol when it is needed, then it's wrong. So you need to make sure that when it is a percent, it has a percent symbol. Okay? You can also think of their other method where you just move it 2 places to the right. and you end up with 41.2%. But again, I find that the easiest thing to remember is percent to decimal divide by 100, decimal percent to percent you times by 100. Okay, so those are the methods that I'll be using as we go through these examples. All right, when you're ready, go ahead and flip your paper over and we'll do the back. So this says 4 out of 7 members of the chess club are boys. What percent of the chess club members are boys? So we're going to take a fraction and we're going to turn it all the way into a percent. So this is going to have multiple steps. So to go from a fraction to a percent, the first step is going to be divide top by the bottom of your fraction. And then the second step is going to be to multiply by 100. So divide the top by the bottom. So top, hit divide, bottom, and then multiply by 100, whatever answer you get. So it says 4 out of 7 of the chess club are boys. So 4 out of 7 we write as 4 over 7. Okay, top divided by bottom on that one, 4 divided by 7 is going to give us 5714. Then we take 0.5714 and we times it by 100 for that last step to write it as a percent, and we get 57.14%. So about 57% of the chess club members are boys, because we're rounding. About 57% of the chess club members are boys. So again, you set up your fraction, or they give you a fraction. Divide the top by bottom. 4 divided by 7, we got a decimal. That was step 1. We take our decimal and times it by 100, and we get our percent. Multiply by 100. That was step 2. So we have turned a fraction into a percent. 4 over 7 is about 57%. It's 57.14%. All right, so let's do some practice ones. So this says write each percent as a fraction or mixed number in simplest form, okay? So we said on the other side, when we were writing a fraction or write a percent as a fraction, we always put it over 100. So this first one, we're going to say 58 over 100. But we need to simplify. So we're going to divide the top and the bottom by 2. Oops. And we're going to, we're going to get 29 over 50 as our answer. So 58% written as a fraction is 29 over 50. So they always go over 100 when you write a percent as a fraction, and then you simplify it. So you're going to go ahead and pause the video and do B and C on your own, and then we'll come back together and check them. All right, so hopefully what you did for B is you went 72 over 100 to start it. And then to simplify it, we did divide by 4, and we should have gotten 18 over 25 as our simplest form. For C, we should have 144 over 100. Divide the top and bottom by 4, and we get 36 over 25. That's an improper fraction, so we're going to turn it into a mixed number. 25 goes into 36 one time with 11 left over, so it's 1 and 11 over 25. Okay, so putting it over 100 and then simplifying. When you simplify, if it's an improper fraction, turning it into a mixed number. And that's how we take percents and write them as a fraction. All right, the next set says write each percent as a decimal. So to go from a percent to a decimal, on the other side we said that we divide by 100. So I'm going to take 16 and divide by 100. And I'm going to get 0.16 as my answer. Notice that I don't have a percent symbol because I'm writing it as a decimal, which is different than a percent. Okay, so doing it just like that, showing your work just like that, go ahead and pause your video and do B and C on your own, and then we'll come back and do them together. All right, so 62.5 divided by 100 is what you should have written, and you get 0.625 as your answer. 120 divided by 100, and you get 1.20 as your answer. Okay, about 45% of the people in the United States have type O blood. Write this percent as a decimal and as a fraction in simplest form. So you're going to take 45% to a decimal and 45% to a fraction. Okay, so basically what we've just been doing of the above ones, but you're going to have two steps. So do like the percent to decimal on this side and the percent to fraction on this side. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video. You're using 45% here. Turn that into a decimal and a fraction, and then we'll come back together and check it. All right, so hopefully what you did, 45% as a decimal, you just do 45 divided by 100, and you should have gotten 0.45 as your decimal answer. And then 45% as a fraction, you should have put 45 over 100. You could simplify dividing the top and the bottom by 5. And you should have gotten 9 over 20 as your fraction answer. So 45% as a decimal and as a fraction. All right, for the next set, it says write each decimal as a percent. So going from a decimal to a percent, we said that we times it by 100. So if I have 0.4 times 100, I get 40% as my answer. Remember that since we're writing it as a percent, we should have a percent symbol in our answer. So go ahead and do B and C on your own. Pause the video, and then we'll come back together and check them. All right, so hopefully what you did for B, 0.023 times 100 equals 2.3%. And then 1.75 times 100 equals 175%. Okay, so again, just taking the decimal they gave you, multiplying by 100, and then in your answer you have a percent symbol because you are writing it as a percent. All right, 3 out of 11 families in the United States own cats. To the nearest percent, what percent of families own cats? So 3 out of 11 is a fraction. So you're going from fraction to percent, which is just like we did at the very top where you had two steps, dividing top by bottom and then multiplying by 100 to get to your percent. So go ahead and pause the video and try this one on your own, and then we'll come back together and check it. Okay, so hopefully what you did for this one was 3 divided by 11, which equals 0.2727, and it just keeps going. If we take 0.2727, 27, and we times it by 100, we get 27.27%. So we're going to say about 27% to round it, so we get rid of that repeating decimal at the end. So Step 1 was divide it top by bottom, get your decimal. Step 2 was multiply by 100 to get your percent. So about 27% of families in the United States own cats. All right, that wraps up lesson 6-5, where we looked at changing between fractions, decimals, and percents.